Address us on the study session from the community. Okay, we have one. Ms. Parks, how are you today?
Surprise, surprise, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Good evening. Trust and timeliness. Trust is so important. Parcel tax, bond. How have you been spending your money recently? Deficit spending. That's the way it's been lately. $3 million transfer from Fund 17 last year in order to get through, in order to balance the second interim. How many teachers? You reduced 16 teachers from your first interim to your second interim. You're not living within your means. And I don't know that the parcel tax and the geo bond or bond, whatever you want to call it, is something that this community is willing to trust you with. And I don't know that this is the time to move forward with it. You haven't balanced your budget. You couldn't continue to deficit spend and use your savings. And I don't know that this is the answer. I think you need to get a grasp on your spending instead of going back to the taxpayers and asking for more money. Again, I would really hope that you would listen to what's being said tonight, but understand that it's not the community's responsibility to continue to bail you out of what you've put yourself in, instead of looking inwardly and cutting and living within your means. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, let's go to the study session.
Okay. Good. You want to introduce him at least, then we'll move down there.
Good evening, board members. Tonight I'm going to introduce you to Justin Rich. He's from KNN. He's our financial advisor. So he's going to talk about the possibility of going for a parcel tax as well as a general obligation bond.
We can either stay up here or go down there, whatever you guys prefer. It might be comfortable up here. We have the heater up here.
What do you want to do?
We okay up here? Or? Okay, we'll stay up here then, since we're all on the screen. And
So we are level, right? Close to level.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah. Well, good evening.
Can I say something first?
Oh, certainly. Sure.
I want to express the board's thanks and the administration, I would imagine, for taking the time to come and address us. But Ms. Parks makes a very good point. Our community, based on what I see, is going to be difficult to convince them to support a parcel tax, and where you got to get, what is it, 55?
Well, for parcel tax, and we'll talk more about it, with 2/3 vote.
Right. Right. Parcel tax 2/3, and the bond is 55.
That's right.
So that being said, you know, we wanted you to come and share this with us, but we have 3 new board members, and I think everybody knows that this is going to be a difficult task for us, and so we're looking forward to your presentation. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you. It's nice to be here with you all. Like you mentioned, we're here to talk about a couple of different funding sources. You know, I think in light of those comments and those concerns, what I'm here tonight to do is just to provide some information. Ultimately, this is a policy decision of this body, to really look at what other peer districts are doing and what how other districts are dealing with the financial circumstances, and to frankly explain some of the differences between a parcel tax and a geo bond. Talk about some of those characteristics, the requirements, and what that funding source can be used for. Just as a little background, I have been your financial advisor for a number of years now, was involved in the issuance of Measure G bonds, and so it's nice to be back in front of you. Some are new faces, some are familiar faces. So because this is a workshop, it's a nice forum to be able to have kind of an interactive discussion. So if there's questions along the way, and if you think that's appropriate, please raise them, and I can help answer some of those as we go along. So first, what I thought I'd do is just talk a little bit about a parcel tax, explain some of the basics, and talk about some of the considerations that districts make when they think about a parcel tax. So with a parcel tax, one of the key things that's important to know is that the revenues really can be used for any purpose. And the limitations that you put on those are self-imposed. That might be for political reasons. It may be for reasons in the community, concerns. So making commitments about what you're going to spend the money for is often something that's done when you do pass a parcel tax. The amount of the parcel tax and the duration of time, those are all things in addition to the use of funds that are determined by the district. They're not laid out in statute. That's really up to you, and you have discretion. Like I mentioned, it requires a 2/3 vote of the people in favor of it. And the one caveat in terms of how a parcel tax is structured is that it must be uniformly applied to all the parcels within a district. So there's a couple of ways you can look at that, and I'll talk about that just in terms of the considerations when you're looking at the structure of it. What's most common and what we're most familiar with is a flat amount per parcel, but there are also other ways that you can do it based on square footage or the size of land. Those things, as long as they're applied uniformly, that's the requirement by law. Some districts choose to look at by square foot because that may shift the tax burden from individual taxpayers to commercial and business owners. So those are all things that can factor into how you might structure a parcel tax. The concern in certain cases that it can be regressive if it's only looking, if it's the same for each and every property owner. So those are all things that are often discussed. There can also be an inflator, whether that's the consumer price index or a flat amount that's escalated annually. That's something else that districts have done as well. Also duration. There's no requirement that it only lasts for a period of time, but oftentimes districts will put a sunset clause of several years. I've provided some information about other Bay Area districts, and it shows what those districts have chose to do in terms of the length of time. And then finally, just the exemption. So there's no exemption that's expressly granted through the statutes or through law, but instead these are things that districts have chosen to do because they think it's in the best interest of the community. That could be a senior exemption for seniors that are the homeowners within the district. Also for low-income folks that are on disability as well.
The senior is not like senior living, like apartments that are set for seniors. It's the owner themselves are over 65.
That's right. And again, that's up to the district, but that's most oftentimes the concern being that seniors on fixed income may have a hard time with that. They don't really have an impact on the district in terms of students that are coming out of it. And so there may be an exemption granted for that. But in the case of a senior living facility, a little bit different because oftentimes that's a corporation. So those are all things that can be considered and be part of the ballot language, frankly.
Thank you.
Can I add something on that? Is there an opt-in or an opt-out when you do that, where a person qualifies but they opt out, so they don't take the? Is that something that would be included in that?
I think they would certainly have the ability just to say that, I'm fine paying the tax. I don't know if they're aware of it, why they would do that, but certainly they could decide to opt in or out. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure. I've provided some information about Alameda County School District. So here's what your neighbors have done, and in gathering this information, what you will see is that since 2013, most Alameda County districts have passed a parcel tax, with 3 exceptions, Newark being one of those school districts who has not, also Pleasanton and New Haven. But since 2013, many Alameda County school districts have found themselves in a spot where they've decided to go out to voters and to put a parcel tax on the ballot.
So there are actually 3 districts that have not had parcel taxes in Alameda County. We're not the only one.
That's right. So New Haven and Pleasanton being the others. I also have some information, I put it in an appendix about some other Contra Costa County districts, just to show, again, some of the other districts in your area. So based on some preliminary information and making some assumptions about what a parcel tax might look for this district, what I did is I went back and I looked at the amount of parcels and the type of parcels that are within the district. So I looked at a few different scenarios. So looking in the box that's in the upper left-hand corner there, this is the total number of parcels that are within the district. Making some assumptions about adjustments, whether that's a senior exemption that you choose to accept, and also some exempt properties, whether those are governmental or religious, institutional. You have just about 11,500 parcels. So if we were to conceptually look at a parcel tax of $50, $100, and $150, in the upper right-hand corner, I put that table there just to demonstrate what kind of annual revenue that would mean from a potential parcel tax. So in the case of a $50 parcel tax, which admittedly is on the lower end of what Bay Area districts are doing, that would mean about $575,000 in annual revenue. On the higher end, $150, that's approximately $1.7 million annually. So this is a snapshot based on some information. I think if the district chose to pursue it, we would obviously look at other scenarios as well to really match what your needs and to evaluate some of the other information, whether through a poll and other things to really find out what's the right fit for this district. Should I pause here and ask, if there's any questions about parcel tax in particular?
I would like to clarify and respond to public comment a little bit. First of all, the purpose of why we're putting this in front of the board today is not to recommend a parcel or a bond, and no one on administration is doing that at this time. We're very aware of where we are budgetarily. However, it really is kind of twofold, in part to make the new board members aware of options that might be available down the road, as well as updating longstanding board members with some of the new nuances that have occurred in the law relative to these type of measures. And we know that these are things that may or may not be down the road, but no action's being taken. I want it to be in the record that we're not recommending either of these at this point in time. And we're probably far away from this still, but I want to just make sure that there's not any misinformation that we're recommending we go for a bond or a parcel. I think that's really important to note. Although I do think that we have been asked as a staff to put in front of the board and begin having larger conversations about longer term solutions. So this really falls under that category of, these are some other longer term solutions we may have to look at some point in time. And we'll be bringing in other things like that. I know solar's coming soon, and we're looking at an array of things. As you know, there's no silver bullet. We're going to look at a combination of things, probably other things to do sooner, and then these things might come later. But I just wanted to be clear about the intent of why we've asked you to be here, and we thank you for being here to just kind of share kind of how does it work now, and refresh our memory of what's involved. And I think that's, for me, it's very helpful just to know how those things have changed and where we are. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Member Thomas.
Yeah, I assume that 2020 would be the earliest we probably could go for this. And does it have to be during a general election?
I have a slide later that will talk more about those specifics, but no, it doesn't have to be at a regularly scheduled election date. So you could choose to do a mailed ballot really on any Tuesday, as long as it's not within a certain, I think 30 days from a regularly scheduled election date.
Okay, our bond passed with just a fraction over 55%. A parcel tax at 2/3 is very difficult. What chance do you think there's going to be that the legislature will put on an initiative that changes that threshold to 55% for parcel taxes?
I've heard about that for, a number of years, and I think you've probably heard the same things about how that's been discussed. I haven't heard momentum to be able to drop the parcel tax threshold anytime in the near future. Personally, I think there's probably going to be some more, financial difficulties until the legislature takes something like that up. But that's my take on it. There's no current proposals in order to drop that threshold that I'm aware of.
Years ago, when Assemblymember Tarico was up there, and he came from here, he was trying to push people, get some people together to co-sponsor the bill to bring it down to 55%. And you're right, it's been something they've been talking about for a while. Yeah. And now, my question is, I see the ones that failed. I know it's obvious that if you don't have the, if you're not partnering with your union leaders, that it's going to be, you just can't do it. So did you see that with Pleasanton and New Haven? I have an idea why ours didn't make it, but or the districts that actually did pass one, how much of it was having the teachers and the classified behind it and knocking on doors and stuff like that?
Oh, in my experience, that certainly is really important. And I think having that kind of unified front from the district is really important. I think it's also a certain amount of strategy too, in really listening to your community and understanding what is important to them. And I understand that you all have that, but being able to have some tangible information about what types of programs and where they would like to see that kind of a funding source put to use. I think that's really helpful information, and to be able to message that out and to clarify some of the, to be able to answer some of the questions, or to be able to, provide information that shows people what the safeguards are and what this will be used for. I think that educational process is really helpful. And that's what I think, when you're talking about a 2/3 threshold, it really takes a concerted effort to be able to communicate that. Teachers, administrators, board members, other stakeholders, I think everyone needs to be on board with that.
Yeah, I realize that, it's going to take, a big effort, and we have to be specific on where the money's going to. Now, in the GEO bond, we had the committee set up. Is that basically the same thing with the parcel tax?
With a campaign committee?
No. After it's passed, on making sure that the monies are spent the way the parcel tax read.
Right. That's not a requirement. It's a practice that some districts have done. I know there's a parcel tax advisory committee that will monitor that. So that's an action that you could take in order to provide another level of transparency, but it's not a requirement.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, certainly.
You know what? Also, by having a parcel tax, we can provide more programs to our district, to our students, such as STEAM, like what Mr. Sanchez has been mentioning in the past. Also, arts, music, and other certain programs.
Thank you.
So I'll move on and talk a little bit about a GEO bond, and then I'll just, again, the basics and some of the considerations you would want to make, also some of the specifics for your district, and then I'll talk a little bit more about the campaign process, qualifying a tax measure, all of those sorts of things for both the parcel tax and GEO bond. Now, to contrast the GEO bond with the parcel tax, tax revenue is used in order to pay debt service on bonds that the school district would issue. The proceeds from the bonds would go to fund facility projects, much like Measure G, to be able to pay for all of the different modernizations and upgrades that you've done in recent time. Like we talked about, the threshold for a Proposition 39 bond is 55%. That's the most common general obligation bond, that school districts use. And that lower voter threshold comes with certain accountability requirements. Things like a Citizens Bond Oversight Committee, maximum tax rate, annual audits, and not allowing funds to be able to go towards towards salaries and operational costs. So those are some of the things that go into, the safeguards for a Proposition 39 bond. Now, the considerations that districts make when it comes to a Proposition 39 bond, tax rate is one of them. In the district's last bond, the maximum tax rate was $39 per $100,000 of assessed value. The legal maximum is $60. So those are things that you will want to explore. What's the right tax rate given your community? That will obviously affect the total amount of the bond. But those are important things to really think through. Things like the number of issues, how many series of bonds will be sold. With Measure G, it was 3 series of bonds in installments to be able to fund whatever those projects were that were planned at that particular period of time. So it really matches up to the cash flow for the district's capital program. So as you start to, I know you're underway with a master plan right now. As the district starts to get a clearer picture of what it wants to do with facilities over the coming years, the AGO bond could potentially fund those costs, and you would want that to match up to how you were to implement that. The term of the bonds, generally it's about 25 to 30 years. That's most common for school districts. And that will affect the repayment of bonds. So, the longer term or the shorter term will affect for each dollar that's borrowed, for how much, you will pay back. And ultimately, the bond program will be structured in a way that it keeps within the tax rate commitments that are made, also dependent on the growth of the tax base or the assessed values within the district. So these are all things that go into a financing program, and we'll talk a little bit more about that on the following slides. I talked a little bit about Measure G, also Measure B going back to 1997. The district has roughly $130 million in GEO bonds that it's passed previously. I've put together just a quick summary of that. As was mentioned, Measure G got about 56% of the vote, whereas prior to that, Measure B had about 82%. So, the community obviously changed during that period of time. There were different circumstances. Looking at the district's combined debt service or principal and interest payments, what you'll see is that the Measure B bonds are going to be maturing over the next several years. So because of that, the property taxes that folks are paying will start to level off as those bonds are paid off in the next few years. So I just provided this. What you'll see is that in blue shaded there are the Measure B bonds and their repayment. And in green is the Measure G bonds from 2011. The red dotted line represents the tax rate that folks pay, and you'll see how that drops down over time. So I took an initial look at a conceptual GEO bond for the district. So, at this time, with the information that we have, the district, based on a maximum tax rate, could look at a bond of roughly $160 million or so, again, based on the maximum tax rate. Now, what you will want to consider are those things that I mentioned previously. Is the maximum tax rate appropriate, or is it something lower than that? And if it is, then that will affect the type of authorization the district would seek. I think that once you start to get input and the findings and recommendations from the master plan, that will guide your decision making here. But here's some preliminary information just to chew on. This is what I would describe as a conservative bond program that is not, has conservative features in terms of the annual assessed value growth and other things that would make this a viable program for you. Now that's a traditional GEO bond and typically how we would structure a program. Something else that you may want to consider though is because of that Measure B debt that is going to be retiring over the next several years, Some districts have gone for what's known as a tax rate extension, and that's a commitment not to raise taxes based on, a certain level that they are today. And as the old debt is retired, you don't exceed that previous tax rate. So this is an option for the district. Again, in the next several years, that Measure B debt will start to be repaid, or will be paid off entirely. And you could have a new bond authorization that does not raise taxes on taxpayers. So that's something to consider. There's some things that you also need to consider with that in terms of, you may need to wait a little bit longer in order to get money. You may need to, take some other steps in the meantime in order to fund your facilities, but it is worth considering. And as you get more into, exploring this, then I think those are things that you would want to consider and really see what that might look like for this district. Should I pause for a second? And, this is sort of the technical part of the presentation. I can speak to any of those things.
I have a couple, but I've spoken too much already. Any board member have anything? And then, okay. There's a couple things that I had. You mentioned the $39 that we chose. Could it be a % of assessed value as opposed to a dollar amount? Like, let's say, 1%?
In effect, that dollar tax rate does serve as a percentage. So you could say, rather than $39 per 100,000, it could be, 0.004%, is roughly what that equates to. Right. Or I should say 0.04%. Yeah, you could structure it that way, and in the ballot language, you will express it that way as well. Right. But that's...
It's probably simpler to do the dollar. I'm just wondering if you could do it that way.
I think that's what, and that's the way the legislature has asked us to approach it with Assembly Bill 195. It asks us to put that in terms of a dollar amount because it's easier for some people to understand.
And then the extension of the parcel of the tax. If the tax amount has gone down, so like you said, with that scale, do you just use the same figure, for instance, $39? If you do the extension, you go back to the original amount. Would that be, in your experience?
It's one way that you could approach it. What you'll see here, let's see, do I have a pointer here? Yeah, I don't think it'll show up. What you'll see here is that with currently the tax rates are just about $100 per 100,000, and as this Measure B, all in blue here, is paid off over the next several years, you'll see that'll drop down to roughly about $30. The $39 maximum tax rate has actually gone down because assessed values have grown by so much and the property tax base has grown more than was anticipated. Mm-hmm. So you could commit yourself to $39 and not exceeding that, and that's certainly one option. Or you could say the combined with all of the bonds won't exceed $95 where it currently is. Right. So those are all things that I think can be explored, are part of formulating the strategy, and would be, as you get feedback from the community on what their tax sensitivity is, you would adjust accordingly.
If I remember correctly, we decided to go with 39. It seemed to be a low enough figure. I mean, we could have easily said 40, but 39 just is easier to, when you're out going door to door.
Sure. And
it seemed to work, even though we only passed it by 1% over. Mm-hmm. So, it was just easier for people to understand, and it seems reasonable at the time.
And from my understanding of it, and I wasn't involved, but my understanding of it is that provided $63 million, which is what was needed and targeted at that time, and $39 was that amount that would get you there.
Right. Thank you.
Sure. So to answer some of those questions about when you could go for either a parcel tax or a GO bond, The 2020 election cycle is a little unique because, as you know, the March primary is earlier than what it has been in the past. So rather than only having 2 regularly scheduled elections, there will be 3: March, June, and then November. And it's also significant because it's a presidential, election year. So there will be what's anticipated to be high voter turnout at the primary and also for the general election. So for a Proposition 39 GO bond, you have to go on a regularly scheduled election. So that would mean, again, March, June, or November. For a parcel tax, those are all options, but you're not limited to just those particular dates. You could also look at any Tuesday not within 30 days of a regularly scheduled election, and some districts choose to do that. They may not benefit from voter turnout. It is a mailed ballot instead, and so you may not benefit from the voter turnout that's expected in 2020. So those are all things that are important for you to really to consider and see how that would play out in this district. I think that's all I want to say right here. I'll talk a little bit more about this on the next slide when we talk about the campaign the process of it. But generally, school districts like to give themselves about 12 to 18 months time to be able to work up to one of those elections. It's a little less that's involved with the parcel tax, in my experience. It's it's a little bit more straightforward in terms of the programs and the different things that you would be looking to fund. Whereas a general obligation bond, there's a lot of prioritizing projects and trying to figure out what would be on the project list. All of those things tend to take a little bit more time in a GO bond.
So going to the election process, it seems like, in my experience, talking to other board members from other districts, if it's a parcel tax and it's specific and you get all the teachers involved, has your experience been that it's better to do it when you have a lower turnout? As opposed to, because you don't have to educate as much, because the turnout's going to be basically school people, let's say, Can you share that with me a little bit?
Yeah, those are considerations. I would say that it matters based on the demographics and the voter profile in your district. So in certain districts, that might be the case. The rationale being that with the smaller group of voters, that you can spend more of your resources and your time targeting those voters to educate them. However, when you do have a smaller voter turnout, it may not be the case that those people are generally supportive of school and education measures. So that's what you have to consider, and what you would want to really think hard about is whether or not that's going to give you the best chance for success.
And then the cost of putting the election on the ballot.
Yeah, so if you're at a regularly scheduled election, you're splitting the cost amongst all of the other agencies and even the state that are on the ballot at the same time. Whereas if you do it on your own, and then you're footing the cost all by yourself. Yeah, that's a good question. Just so I don't leave this out, in order to qualify an election for the ballot, you need to submit to the registrar of voters at least 88 days prior, and the board resolution authorizing that measure. So generally about 3.5 months ahead of time, you would need to pass a resolution so that you can make that deadline. So typically what school districts will do when they're getting ready for a bond election is they'll hire somebody like myself, also some other consultants to help with that. That was the case last time with Measure G. There's, for myself, for a financial advisor, we help with the funding analysis in order to do the research, in order to run the numbers and provide the quantitative expertise to show what a parcel tax, what a GO bond measure means in terms of funding and the repayment of those. Now, you also want to contract with somebody who can help guide you through that process. What are the different things that you want to focus on? Some of those questions about which election date do we choose? What's the right dollar amount? All of those strategic questions You want somebody who has been involved in this and has that track record, and really that's their specialty and their expertise. And they rely on a voter survey from a survey consultant, going and polling the universe of likely voters to get a really statistically significant sample of who is likely to vote, what are they likely to support, what are the issues that are most important to them, and what you can do with that information in order to be successful. So those three consultants together, can provide a feasibility analysis. This tells the board and this tells the district, yes, you have a reasonable chance of success, or you know what, this is not the climate for that, this is not the time for that. Those are, that's the type of decision-making information you would want. And the estimated cost for something like this, if you were looking at a single measure, I would guess that it would be somewhere between $40,000 to $45,000 for this analysis. If you're looking at both of them together, it's a little more expensive because I think you're going to spend a little bit more money on the poll to really test both of those things. And that'll, bump up the cost a little bit, probably more like 55 to 60 or so. So that's your team that helps you make these decisions to really think about that, and then ultimately as a board to decide how you want to proceed. So I can pause here. We can talk a little bit about sort of those strategic things, or if not, we can just proceed to really what's next for you. So I think the next steps on this is if the district wants to pursue this further in just exploring these options, I think you would bring forward the contracts from the other consultants that would be involved in this. That's something that I will help the district with in terms of interviewing and bringing on a campaign advisor and a survey consultant. And so the district would consider a process in order to bring those folks on. That's probably in the next couple of months that you would do that. Probably towards the end of spring, you might look to actually get a poll, and this is assuming that you're pursuing a March 2020 election for one for one of these measures. If not, it gives you some more time to be able to prepare and to think through this. But so May or June timeframe for a public opinion survey. Shortly after that, I would say, for the strategy consultant to be able to take all of that information and what they found and come back to you sometime during the summer to say, here's what we found, here's what we think, here's what we would recommend for you going forward. Now, I know you also, based on the timelines currently set out, the facilities plan, master plan is going to be starting to wrap up towards the end of summer. So that'll give you an opportunity to really digest all of that information, see where your funding needs are from a facilities perspective. And then if you chose to move forward, you would start to get out to your community and talk to them about what your facility needs are, try to find out where their priorities are, and really understand before you make the decision to put one of these measures on the ballot. You would need to do that by early December, again, like I said, to make the March 2020 election date. I'll stop there. I've covered a lot, and so just make sure that all makes sense, and pause for comments.
So right at the present time, you're our financial advisor.
That's right.
So when the superintendent or our CFO asked that we do the workshop, I wanted to make sure that we were fair to other financial advisors and maybe have a board meeting where we can invite, let's say, 3 people. Since you're a financial advisor right now, would you help us on identifying other financial advisors, or that we could, so that, and then you would, I'm sure you would probably be one of the ones that, if we had that on the board meeting, would you help us with that process, or how would that go?
Mr. Rodriguez, we did do a interview 2 vendors, which was California Financial Services as well as KNN. Both Sarah, Kim, and I met with these 2 vendors, and based on Mr. Justin Rich presentation as well as California Financial Services, we decided to go with KNN because they know more about the Bay Area data than versus California Financial Services.
Okay, so you meaning who decided?
Well, all 3 of us, Sarah, Kim, and myself.
Right. In my opinion, that's something that the board decides.
Sure.
Okay, and I would not be in favor of that. I would want to interview other. Now, if this gentleman here is our financial advisor right now, he's really into it because he's in the middle of all that. Would you be able to help us identify other, if the board decided to bring them in so we could talk to?
If I may kind of interject here, I think the next step would really be waiting for the board to give us direction if this is even something that we want to even look at. I have not got any indication that's where the board is. So I think before that occurs, I think I definitely agree. We could definitely do a regular RFP and say we're really seriously considering it. I just don't know if we're seriously considering it. So I think the purpose of this workshop was not to say that this is the advisor, this is what we want to do. It really is to orient the board to here's how it works. So I think I would kind of hold off on waiting until the board's kind of come into a place where, is this something we want to do or not? So,
I think.
But I know Member Martinez might want to say something.
Yeah.
So I didn't mean to cut her off.
Did you want to speak? And then Member Gutierrez.
Yes, I think, I mean, when the topic came up a month or so ago, I actually thought even this presentation was a little too soon, frankly, just given the other issues we need to work through. So I think it is a little too early to start thinking about, I think we as a board need to have more conversation before any next steps, which is my humble opinion.
Member Gutierrez.
Not to move forward, but just to, on an educational purposes, what is the process? If we did want to move forward with this, is it something that I mean, what is the process?
It would be the prior slide that shows kind of the timeline.
Correct.
It would require the board to kind of decide, okay, we do want to do this. I mean, regardless who the presenter is today, I think that it would be, we'd have to approve some contracts to get those 3 consultants involved. We'd have to conduct an opinion survey in June. We'd have to get some recommendations and findings. So that whole timeline would be what it would entail. But I think that, we're still, the challenge is we're kind of in this right sizing of the district timeframe, and it may not be clear enough to know what we want to do yet, but I didn't want to wait until we got further into that and not have these tools in your mind should you decide that's something you want to do. Because I think the other part of it is, as he mentioned, it doesn't have to be this time frame. It can be within 3 months of any election or even any Tuesday, it sounds like. So that we may not, if the board gets to a place maybe in a year or 6 months or 8 months where, okay, now I think we're ready. We made the adjustments. We think the community will sell it, will buy it now. All of you know the community better than anyone on staff, and I think that it's good to know that I really just wanted you to have the structure with you, and then when the board gets to the place of doing that, then we can execute it. So
I think you misunderstood what I was saying. Okay, we have a financial advisor right now, and since he is our financial advisor, he can help us if the board deems that that's where they're going to go. Right. The reason that I said yes to having this workshop was just for the board to get information. And so that, correct, because if we look at November of 2020, then we still have plenty of time. So, and I think it's a good discussion for the board to have. And since we have a gentleman that's already here, right, because, it'd be nice to have a study on the measures that passed on who their financial advisors were. There's probably, I don't know how many you were involved in, but there could be other people that were involved in, let's say, 10 say 8 out of 10 that they were involved in, they passed it. That's what I'm looking for, okay?
Okay.
Member Thomas?
Well, I'm just wondering, what does it mean that you are our financial advisor? Are you on contract to us and you've been helping us all along with the bond, or what?
Yeah, our firm has been working with you for a long time. I personally have been working with you since 2014 and helping you with your Measure G bonds that have been sold. On an annual basis, there are things that we do for you, like preparing continuing disclosure information that's submitted annually. So those are things that I help you with, yes.
Okay.
Okay. Anyone else? So we'll have to,
Okay.
don't go away. I want to thank you. So we'll have to put it on the agenda for the board to have a discussion on if we want to proceed with this, and how would the time frame, for instance, change if we do November of 2020? You could probably answer that one now, if you don't mind. If we decided November of 2020, how would the whole thing change as far as, would it be 6 months from now?
I think that's probably reasonable, and it would be important to know also if we're talking about a parcel tax only, or a parcel tax and a GO bond.
Right.
And which one is the priority? Right. Which one is most important right now? And I don't have a perfect sense of that from you all. So.
Right. And then if we decide to go to extend the bond we already have, how does that change?
I don't think it changes. I think it changes the strategy and how that's communicated to the public.
Right. Okay, great. Again, thank you for your presentation. And
you bet. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. I mean,
Thank you.
Member Thomas and I have been here a long time, and I'm thinking, apparently the organization that helped us pass the GO bond stayed on, and that's who you represent, right?
Yeah, and to clarify, I'm your financial advisor, and so there's also campaign consultants that help with the other aspects of,
right.
of passing your bond.
Right.
I'm the quantitative expert that makes sure that we structure the bond in a way to honor those commitments that are made, to show you how much money you can reasonably borrow and pay back, how to, all of the financial considerations. Right. Those people that work with actually passing the bond and what I do is important for that, so that the community can trust, what you're going to do is going to honor, what you say. But ultimately, there's campaign consultants that are, going to help you with the strategy and messaging that and all that stuff.
Thank you.
Certainly.
Thank you again for, taking the time to, bring us up to date on all this. Appreciate it.
You bet. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, does the board want to take a break before they go to closed session, or do they want to go, you guys want to go to closed session now?
I'm fine.
I am going to take.
Okay, so let's take 5 minutes and then we'll go.
Okay, we'll be back here.
Okay, so let's see, so how do I do this? You want to take 5 minutes and then come back, and then when do we do that? Is that okay? Okay, so let's take 5 minutes and then we'll come back, and then
Okay.
I'll ask for public comment on closed session, and we'll go to closed session. Thank you. And we're going to be going to closed session. Before we do that, in closed session, we're going to be discussing public employee appointment or employment discipline, 3.1, 3.2, conference with labor negotiator, employee organizations, NTA and CSEA, 3.3, conference with legal counsel regarding anticipated litigation, 3.4, conference with legal counsel regarding assisting litigation, and 3.5, public employee performance evaluation for the superintendent. Does anyone want to address the board on any one of these items before we go to closed session? Okay, seeing none, we'll go to closed session, and hopefully we'll be back by 7 o'clock.